All right, welcome everybody into another edition of Draft on Tap, where we try to get you as close as we can to the draft coming up in about a month. As always, my co-host from the Burgundy and Gold Report is Adam Aniba. Adam, how are you?
I'm great. It's fun doing all these mock drafts during this time because it gives you an opportunity to get to know some of these, day three guys that you might not have heard of. So it's always fun using these simulators.
It is, and from Pro Football Network, our guest today is Ian Wharton. Ian, thanks for hopping on with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It's like you said, it's the best time of the year. Free agency this year wasn't too fun, but usually it's kind of fun. And but really, it's just a bridge to the next step, and that way we can start really owning in on what we know about the draft, what we think we know about the draft, and then we get to draft, and then we know nothing, and it's just great.
Ian, before we get started on these mock drafts, and I'm excited because these are actually the first mocks we'll have done on the show this year, tell us a little bit about how you got started in the space.
Yeah, so when I went to college, I wanted to be, I thought I wanted to be like an agent, thought I wanted to be, an NFL scout, and kind of explored those paths. Didn't want to go to law school. Not that I needed to, but like everyone at the time thought that you had to go to law school for that, and I was like, I can't do law school. That's not me. And so I started hanging around the football team at Ashland University, a small private school in Ohio, um, and really just took to the evaluation process, took to the grind, took to the constant reevaluation of yourself and how to get better, and just the constant learning. And so fell in love with the learning. And so from there, went to University of Houston, went to school there, was also working with the football team a little bit there as well, and just continued to learn from Tom Herman and some really great coaches out there. And so kind of looked at the game a little bit differently after experiencing, a couple good programs and successful programs. And from there, started writing for Bleacher Report for probably like 6 years. Got into sports betting a little bit, but always kind of had an eye on the draft. It's always been my favorite thing to cover, no matter what I've been covering. And so joined PFN a year ago in fantasy space and also with NFL and NFL draft. And so now mainly focusing on NFL and NFL draft and leading a team of really talented people.
What was it about PFN that made you make the move there a year ago?
So I was covering the Dolphins for probably the first 3 or 4 years that I was writing. And Matt Canada is the owner of PFN. And so we developed a relationship way back then. And lo and behold, he ends up founding PFN. Today, we announced an exciting partnership and partial sale of the company to the same company that owns Sportskeeda. And so big day for PFN to be expanding. And so it really fell back to one that they really grown the company in extremely fast rate within 2 or 3 years, bringing in Adam Beasley, bringing in Tony Pauline, some really great people. So that was a big perk, but also just knowing Matt, like Matt's a great owner. He's a great CEO, great person. And so we had conversations way back about, I remember it was like Byron Jones. We were talking about him. We were talking about some old UConn prospects back in the day, because that's kind of in his backyard. And so just kind of goes back to like random phone conversations, just building that trust in those relationships.
Well, we're excited to have you on the show today. And part of the reason I love these episodes in particular is I don't know who these guys are in the fifth, sixth, seventh rounds. That's what I have Adam here for, because he scours them all and makes sure that I know who they are. So I'm excited, as a lot of folks, I think, when we towards the back end of these drafts. Before we get into the mocks, I'm curious. Commanders, by all accounts, will be starting Sam Howell this year. I'm just curious, kind of your thoughts on him when he came out. There's a lot of people that had thought if he came out the year before, maybe it was higher. If he came out this year, maybe he's higher. Your thoughts on why he slips, maybe, and where you kind of see him as a starter going forward.
Yeah, I was surprised he went where he went. I can't really explain it. I think he's someone who you see a lot of what you want to see as a solid quarterback. I mean, I think he profiles as an average quarterback, starting quarterback, and that's not to sneeze, nothing to sneeze at. Like, that's not a bad thing, especially when you're not taking that guy in the first round. And he's got a strong arm. He can push the ball downfield. He has an aggressive mindset. I think a big question coming out on him entering his junior season was, can he run the ball? Like, can he actually show a little bit of mobility? Can he do that? And then he just explodes in a way that I don't think anyone expected. And so he is a mobile guy. He's a good athlete. I liken him a lot to Baker Mayfield. And I wasn't like over the moon with Baker Mayfield as a prospect. He was a good prospect, and I think Howell was too. And I thought he would be a nice second round pick, a solid day two type of guy. You profile him like a Kirk Cousins or Baker Mayfield, somewhere in like that range of if you put enough pieces around him, you should be able to have a good offense. And I think he takes care of the ball, pretty well. Yeah, he's not the biggest, he's not the strongest, but we saw Kenny Pickett go in the first round. So, and I think from an understanding of scheme and understanding of what you're looking at, I think he's certainly was on par with Pickett. And obviously, we're not privy to some of those discussions and whiteboard sessions, but like Pickett showed, a lot of weaknesses that I thought Howell on the field didn't necessarily show. And so I was really baffled. I don't really know what happened with that whole quarterback class. I think maybe the NFL just wanted to pass, and they were just like, we're just good on all these guys, and we don't really want to invest too much in any of them. It's kind of funny, like a year later, we're looking at Desmond Ridder and Sam Howell as starters when that league just kind of passed on them all. And so it's strange to me. I think he probably would have been my QB2 last year. I would have had him over Ridder, probably would have had him behind Willis, but with the caveat of like Willis was very dependent on interviews. He was very dependent on whiteboard. And things that like we just wouldn't know. And I'm very like pro tools and very pro upside, and so very different player than Willis. So I like him as a prospect. I'm excited that they're going to give him a shot. I think he could do some real good work, especially with Eric Bieniemy being there, and especially with these weapons that he's got around him.
Where would you have him this year if he was coming out?
So I think I'd have him as QB5. I'd have him pretty close with Levis, though, I think. And so for me, I have Richardson 1 and Stroud 2. I mean, it just kind of depends. I mean, each of these guys is so situational. I think Stroud and Richardson are the two guys that could be stars. And I think it's easier for me to bucket them as that. And then I would say I think Young and Levis can be good to average. I don't see a super high upside for either of those guys. I could see them busting as well. And then I would say you start to get into like Hooker and everyone else. And those guys are more projects. I think Howell would somewhere slide between Levis, Young, and Hooker, somewhere between that, where you're saying, again, it's probably a day 2 pick. Like I have Bryce Young as a day 2 pick. I think he's a second round talent. I don't see that super high upside people are talking about. Same with Levis. So it's hard, right? Because we know the NFL is going to take these guys top 10, but the grade could be different than what we know is going to happen. So again, I would look at him as like a second round pick. I still think Washington came out of that draft getting a guy who profiles as a potential starter and someone that you may want to replace one day, but you kind of have to just see how it goes. Like Dak Prescott was like the same way. Jalen Hurts, same way. Very different tools, but you looked at them the same way to say, love X, Y, Z, but they have major question marks. So it's kind of funny how some of these guys get pushed up, even though they have similar question marks.
All right, let's get into these mock drafts. I'm going to start with yours on the first round here.
Yeah, so my first mock draft, so picking 16th, a lot of the guys that I was looking at, and I went into this with like a very open mind. So like for me, Washington, I'm like, okay, offense, we're looking at maybe left tackle we're considering. Maybe upgrade the line. I don't know. Personally, I don't think that's a huge need, but I think upgrading over Charles Leno could be nice, depending on who's on the board. Secondary, certainly open to a secondary pick, depending on who's there. We know like the defensive front 7 is pretty solid, especially getting Cody Barton. I think he's going to probably be penciled in as a starter this year. He could be pretty productive. I look at needs at tight end, long-term potentially being a factor. I love Logan Thomas. I don't know what Logan Thomas is going to be just because of injuries. I hope he's a star again, but who knows? I could see them liking a running back. I could see Bijan Robinson going in the first round. Do I think it'll happen? No, but I think it could. So the way the board fell in my first mock draft using the PFN mock draft simulator, I had Devin Witherspoon available. I had Trenton Simpson available from Clemson. I had Brian Branch, Peter Skoronski available. So I had some really good players on the board. I ended up going with Devin Witherspoon out of Illinois. I don't think he'll be on the board at this point, but he's almost 6 foot. He's a little bit thinner, 185 pounds-ish. I think he'll probably play at, but a pretty good speed. He's not really a press and run type of guy as much, but I think he off ball when he's really keying in on the ball, keying in on the quarterback. I think he's a really, really impressive player, plays with great physicality. I think he's aggressive against the run. So I think in that secondary Kendall Fuller is kind of, someone I think that embodies that mindset in a lot of different ways, and he's kind of shown that throughout his career. William Jackson might actually be somewhat of, and Washington fans might not want to hear that, but when William Jackson was really good, he was a really good player, and I think Witherspoon kind of shows some of that same tenacity, some of that same skill set. I don't know if he's going to have a lot of ball production in the NFL. Some of that's going to be scheme dependent, but you could be a really solid cover corner. And so I looked at Witherspoon and I took the plunge there.
Now that's a guy that can play inside or out, or you like him mainly outside on the boundary?
I've seen him more on the outside, so I have a little bit more trust there. I think some of his tape on the inside, turning and running. So if I get him in the slot, I want to send my guy deep. And I don't know if that's more of a technique thing. I kind of have to watch a little bit more of him there, or I don't think it's a physical limitation. I don't think he's stiff per se, but if I do catch him in the slot, if I'm Philadelphia and I've got Devontae Smith, I'm probably going to send him on a go route if he's in the slot, just because I know he's probably not going to get as much safety help. So I like him more on the outside, getting him out there on the boundary.
Adam, who did you have here in the first round?
I wish Witherspoon. I definitely would have took him. He was off the board. Gonzalez was off the board. Like you said, we were looking at some tackle prospects. Harrison. I had him in my trade back scenario. Broderick, of course, that would be a great scenario for them. But I went with Joey Porter Jr. Evaluated him early on the season. Really like what he can do as an outside corner. What I need to see more is the backpedaling transition, because looking at his film, he does fit with what a lot of Washington wants to do as far as, more zone, more off coverage. But when he was forced to, be at the line and really backpedal and transition, we didn't see a ton of that at Penn State. So that's a bit of a question. But at number 16, to get, a 6'2" plus corner like that, I think it was 2013 since they took a corner, which was Carlos Rogers. So it's been a real long time. I think it's a big position of need. I think, people are getting caught up in, Benjamin St-Juste and Fuller. I'm not confident in St-Juste staying healthy. And Fuller is just, helter skelter. You'll really get some, good reps from him. Then other times it's just like what's happening to the guy. He's playing like a 34-year-old, but he's only 27. So, I think cornerback is a position you should really draft early every year. And that's those first 1, 2, 3 rounds. If you don't have a true lockdown and a true, second, I think Washington has a bunch of, number 2s and 3, 4s. I don't think they have anybody that's really that lockdown kind of guy. And Porter, he definitely has that ceiling to be that lockdown kind of corner that they need on the boundary.
I like that one there. I still think that they can go D-end. I saw Nolan Smith was still there in a bunch. I think, in my mind, preparing for the future. And I guess that's why I can see tight end. I've actually seen more and more people mocking tight end to the Commanders in the first round. And I guess if you can get one of these game wreckers, I can see that. I think personally I'm a little higher on the tight end room in Washington than some others, and what possibly can be happening. I like Bates as a blocker. I think they liked what they saw from Cole Turner before he got hurt last year in camp. But the way the game is changing, you can't overvalue the tight end in these formations. So I think those are all good spots. I had run one of the PFF or the PFN mocks where we got with trade backs, and I don't usually do trades in mine personally, just because. But I had a scenario where I was able to pick up a first rounder for next year in a spot where we only traded back, I think, 5 or 6 spots, and then traded that one and was able to get another future. And really, in my mind, with new ownership coming, and I know that the current staff won't want to hear it, but I'd be loading up on as many picks for next year's draft as possible. All right, let's move on to the second round.
Yeah, so
Adam, let's start with you on this one.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was shocked. The guy that I'm really high on as far as, the tackle position, Darnell Wright from Tennessee. We saw him play left tackle and right tackle. Somehow he fell the second round. I've got him with that late first round grade, fringe second round. But to be where they're picking in the second round, yeah, I was really surprised. I just finished watching his tape. I really loved what I saw, especially at right tackle. I think left tackle, he'll need some time. But, a lot of people have talked about moving him side to guard. I think he's better than that. I think day one, right tackle, of a team like Washington. I know they just picked up Wiley, but, Kansas City fans I've talked to said he was way more impressive playing guard. So, that would definitely be an option with him. But, you're talking about a guy like Darnell Wright, right away, right tackle position. And, maybe in a year he can, take over for Leno at left tackle, because I see him, he's had a lot of reps in college, and that's what I like, one of the best SEC offensive tackles last year and over the last 2 years. So I think he'd be a steal if available in the second round.
A lot of people don't know this on this. They do on this program. I'm a huge Georgia fan, lifelong. We grew up that way. And my brother left the family and went to Tennessee. And as a Tennessee alumni. So even though, we're upset at him about it, I still love him. But he was saying, that Darnell Wright played left tackle. I mean, they asked him to make the move to right tackle because they needed it. Definitely has the ability to play both sides. And he couldn't tell me enough good things about Darnell Wright. Typically not a homer. So I like the idea of him and what he provides. He reminds me a bit of when Trey Smith took that drop, and it stunned me. I'm with you. If that guy's around in the middle of the second round, I think you're getting great value. Ian, who do you have there in the second round?
Yeah, we were on similar wavelengths. I went with John Michael Schmitz, the center out of Minnesota. Yeah,
Perfect.
and if I could have gotten a tackle, I didn't have one available to me at that pick. Otherwise, I was looking at the same direction. I think that was a great pick. But John Michael Schmitz, just a really, really impressive center. I mean, he does it all. He's got the tremendous athleticism. I think when I look at his film, really strong pass blocker. I think his upside is really to be, one of those guys. I'm actually surprised he hasn't gotten a little bit more late first round buzz, especially in this class. It just so happens I don't think the teams at the end of the first round really need a center. But otherwise, I think he would be in that mix. But looking at long term, you want to save costs, you want to upgrade the position. I think that's a relatively easy pick unless there's a star on the board.
Well, and to your point, back to back, when healthy, as they say, right? Chase Roulier, one of the better centers in the league, particularly for what he gets paid. But he's been hurt 2 years in a row. And the idea that you could go in this team, could go into next year with him and Tyler Larson as the two guys on your roster. Listen, the numbers are weird with Larson because they win a lot of games when he plays football. But obviously an upgrade can be is needed. Ian, I'm curious before we move on to the third round. Keely Ringo feels like, a year ago was a top 10 prospect in a lot of, way too early mocks. It feels like they've got him plummeted into the bottom of the first round in a lot of places. What happened with Keely that he took such a drop off, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I could even see him going second round, and it just
Right.
it's sometimes it's like these guys, you see too much of them. I almost wonder if he's a victim of that. His limitations, I think, are obvious. He's not, the fastest guy on tape. He's a big corner, but like big corners are in vogue. So it's just I've seen some people even speculate he goes to safety, which I don't really particularly see that. Maybe in like very specific scheme, but I think he really competed well against Ohio State. I think that was a good showing for him. Yeah, he lost against Marvin Harrison, but shocker. I mean, that's dude's best wide receiver prospect probably in like last 10 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's just phenomenal. So, but he held his own. He's super physical. I love his relentlessness in the run game. Guy knows his keys. He's a really smart player. I think he's a solid guy. I think he should be probably about him, maybe middle to first, late first rounder. It just depends on the scheme. I love Joey Porter. I think Joey Porter Jr. is the best corner in the class for me personally. I don't think there's a huge separation between Gonzalez, Ringo, Porter. It just kind of depends on, do you trust physically where he's at? And are you comfortable with some of he is a little stiff. Are you comfortable with that stiffness and kind of working around that? But I mean, a team like Philadelphia, that's why he was mocked there, all preseason or, throughout the season. And then all of a sudden he gets dropped a lot. And it's just strange. Like there's a lot of defenses that run that big corner, like kind of that specialty as CB1.
I wonder with Gonzalez how much getting Dan Lanning out there for that 1 year really helped him turn the corner and boosted his stock to get that kind of coaching, because I don't remember him being mocked quite that high prior to this season. Adam, let's see. What do you got next draft pick?
Yeah, I was a little hesitant because we've seen Rivera and Del Rio not put in a ton of emphasis on finding that Mike linebacker. They've had multiple opportunities in the draft.
Or none.
Or none. But I just coming around with that 3rd round pick, I was hoping to, see some interior offensive linemen. They just weren't there. So I went with Cincinnati, Ivan Pace Jr. A little undersized. I think a lot of us expected he'd be at least over 6 foot coming in the combine, but he's checked in just a shade under that. But he's a heat-seeking missile. I just love the way he attacks the ball. Coverage, he's serviceable. As far as one-on-one with tight ends, I'm not sure. A little bit of short arms. He could struggle in that right away. But for that prototypical Mike that you're looking for, just that aggression that's going to, cover a lot of ground, sideline to sideline. I really liked what he could do. I think with Washington running so much zone, I think he could definitely, be an upgrade. Maybe not right away, but, we could see him, mid-season or even later, get some legitimate snaps at a potential Mike. But yeah, I'm not sure I see them going for a linebacker in the 3rd round. I think they might go another position, but I just thought the value was really good with him on the board.
Real quick follow-up on that one, Adam. I've heard clamoring that in year 3, maybe they hope that Jamin can finally take over that Mike spot. It feels like he's just so much better suited when he doesn't have to be that Mike. Right. Do you like him getting into the Mike in year 3, or like, hey, we've got him outside, he plays really well there, let's just leave him there?
I think, that comes back to coaching. I think really good coaching, could put him in a position to be that guy. I'm just not. I know we saw some, improvements that second half, particularly with Jack Del Rio and a lot of things he was doing. I'm just not confident in what he does as far as, molding these guys, especially Jamin coming out of Kentucky, because you saw a tremendous, uptick in his play from that first year to that last year that he had. I'm just not sure he can play that role. I'm not saying he's limited and he can't, but right now, I don't think that they have a serviceable Mike on the roster, and it might be a situation where Curl can get that green dot and he can play more of that role, and there's less emphasis on the linebackers. But we saw them do that, put the green dot on Jamin for a little bit last year, and he did okay. I'm just haven't heard anybody I've reached out to and talked. Nobody's screaming that, wow, he controls the field. And I think when you're that Mike, you have to control everybody. You have to, make shifts. You have to control where everyone's lining up. And they say Curl is really natural at that role. So maybe they're just, not going to put much emphasis on a Mike. But yeah, Pace Jr. was a legitimate add in the 3rd round if he was there. So,
Ian, who do you have here?
So I went to the tackle position here, and you're going to know this one, Warren McClendon.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes the board fall, and I think he's a fine pick here. I think this is a good value. You guys know, athletic, and everything I'm looking for in the trenches, I don't care. I need him to be athletic, unless if you're like DeJuan Jones, who actually was pretty athletic for his size, but like Orlando Brown, like there's a couple of exceptions that you'll make. But for me, McClendon is that guy, classic middle round pick. Get him in the system. We're probably developing him, for 2023. We're hoping to not really see him on the field. Right. So it's, once you get to these middle rounds, it's about next year. And so for me, McClendon, it's about improving those hand positioning, improving that strike a little bit. Because when he hits, he's powerful and it's impressive. And when he gets in space, he's running dudes over. I love to see all of that. It's just a matter of getting him there consistently. These guys either work out or they don't. It's usually not much in between. You're kind of hoping that, he turns into a solid starter. But I love the skill set. He's well coached coming from Georgia, but you just got to get him up and kind of get him there consistently.
Yeah, it's been odd with Georgia tackles recently. They have, in particular, been hit or miss. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. But it's been an interesting trend as how the tackles have worked. The centers and guards have been better suited coming out of Georgia. But I like both the tackles. And I think both of them don't have a ton of experience. So I think, to your point, getting this guy ready for next year would be the key. Another Georgia guy that I like in this range is Kenny McIntosh, if you're looking for a running back, who I think does exactly what the league is looking for now. All right, Adam, who do you have next?
So I was a little surprised because, I wasn't anticipating going corner again. But again, I talk about how the need is just so important. And just looking on the board, I didn't see anybody in interior offensive line that really, jumped out at me, or most of any other positions of need. But surprised to see Maryland cornerback Jacorian Bennett on the board. Fourth round, again, 6'2", just a shade over 200 pounds. He's going to be more typecasted for that outside role. But, man, we saw at the combine, I don't fall in love with the underwear Olympics, but, man, he blazed it. I think it was 4.3740. Him and his teammate both were just unbelievable. And, again, he's nowhere close to his fellow guy over at Maryland. But, this is a guy, I think you have Danfler now that we got from Minnesota, Fuller, St. Juice, and then Danny Johnson and Holmes. You got a bunch of guys on the back end of the roster that really aren't screaming, long term for us. So I think Jacorian Bennett, I could see a scenario where right away probably wouldn't play, but you never know, by midseason he could be on the outside. And maybe Fuller really finds his groove back at slot, because that's really what I've been looking for, is trying to find one of these slot corners in the mid rounds. I'm just not seeing anyone with true value. So yeah, with Jacorian Bennett from Maryland.
It was odd about Fuller. You mentioned this earlier. It is surprising that he's only 27. I think this will be his year 28 season. It feels like
Right.
He's been in the league forever. Was a better slot corner 2 years ago. Last year, they had started him out in the slot, was not good there, moved him back outside, played much better out there as the year went on. Surprising, because usually it goes the other way around, not that you find your groove back on the outside. Odd. It feels like he could use an upgrade, but he was really good last year. Ian, who do you have here?
Yeah, and by the way, you said Fuller's age, and I actually was like shocked for a second. I was like, wow, I did not realize
Right.
he was that young still. Like, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a great cornerback available yet. I don't get around to the position until a little bit later. But looking at Jamie Robinson from Florida State, and this is a little bit of a tough spot. I didn't love really who fell to me on the board, but I feel like I'd like to add a little bit more to that safety position just to bolster it up. And I see some guys that I think are going to be able to be a little bit more of a steal. Maybe you reach on someone else here instead of taking him. But Robinson, he's been very productive. Didn't really have great, underwear Olympics. And so I know that, but I do think that this coaching staff does a good job kind of compensating that. We've seen that with some other secondary members throughout, especially if you look at Ron Rivera's career. He's just really gotten the most out of safeties throughout every stop that he's been at. And so for me, I'm looking at him. Can make some tackles for loss, pretty active in the passing lanes, good tackler, solid player. Maybe he ends up being special
kind of
teams. Maybe he
size
just
is
ends
he?
up. He's 5'11", 203. So he's good. Good size. You want him to do a little bit more in coverage. You want to see him be a little bit more fluid, be a little bit higher upside type of player. But sometimes when you hit these day 3 picks, that is kind of what happens. You see some of those limitations.
I've heard his name. I'm going to have to go back and take a look at him because I'm not very I'm not too familiar with him, which is the beauty of why we do these things, right? Because I'm going to hear some names today. I'm going to have to go back and take another look at. Adam, who do you have up next?
Yeah, so we saw with Deron Payne, now a ton of money is dedicated to the interior, so there's a lot of questions what's going to happen with Montez Sweat and Chase Young. So a guy that fell to the board, I was a little surprised because earlier in the year, actually during the season, a lot of guys I talked to had him in that second, third round range. Is Clemson edge rusher KJ Henry. 6'4", just over 260, so not the biggest guy. He's not going to blow your mind with his bend or anything like that, but to be available in the 5th round, I had him more that late 3rd round, early 4th round value. So I think it's a guy, you work with Shaka Toney, because again, we still haven't seen Washington use him much, but again, that's a 7th rounder. I think you get him in the mix, just let him attack. On those 5-man fronts, you can, potentially bring him in. But I think something's got to give. I don't think you're going to wait till Montez Sweat is gone or your Chase Young decision and then start looking at edges, especially in free agency. We know it's a premium. But like I said, KJ Henry, I think, is a more than sufficient guy to find that late, and I think a ton of upside.
You said Clemson.
Yeah.
Ian, where are you at here?
Yep. So this is where I grab a running back. I go Roshan Johnson out of Texas. you just want to, this is where I love taking backs. I'm not going to lie. I love day three backs. This is where you can go one of two directions, right? Like you go, maybe the guy with traits, maybe the guy that just wasn't in a great situation. You're looking for the Isaiah Pacheco, the guy that just leaps off the field with his athleticism, but maybe just had a really tough situation. Johnson was very productive for Texas behind Bijan Robinson. So obviously we all saw a lot of him because of that. If you're watching Robinson, you're gonna see Johnson. I think he's just a solid guy. Is he gonna be a standout? Probably not. I don't think he's gonna be like your future starter, but he's a really good RB2. And I think there's definitely value in that, especially when you hit this part of the draft. As I did my other mock draft, I actually had two other picks that I liked a little bit more than Johnson. But Johnson's on my day three board of guys I'm pretty much taking in most mock drafts.
It's interesting. I was in one of the commander spaces the other day, and there's a couple of guys in there just beating the drum for Bijan at 16. And while I'm not into that, it's interesting because the name that you mentioned there was brought up. I think his production, like his yards per carry and everything, were eerily similar to Bijan's. Not saying they're the same player, but I just thought it was interesting how close like some of those numbers were. Adam, who do you have going next here?
Yeah, talk about running backs. The previous round of this round, this is exactly where I like to take them. And a guy I looked at a couple weeks ago, Spears from Tulane, just wasn't on the board. I really liked him as that changeup because I think when you saw Washington release J.D. McKissick and understanding that Gibson, this is his final year, unless he has a breakout, even if breakout year, we could lose him. If he doesn't do well, we could lose him. So I think it's more than just finding a third running back. It's potentially finding that change-up guy for Robinson in the future. And a guy I really liked is Keaton Mitchell out of ECU, undersized, 5'8", 179. But, man, he is an awesome receiver. He'll run better routes than most guys on Washington right now. So that's a guy you can bring on, change up third down. I'd love to see what Eric Bieniemy is going to do, getting these two back sets. I think this is a guy that can just pretty much open the field for you. And, 4.47, not going to blow you away with that. But he's one of those guys. He's a lot quicker on tape, a lot quicker on the field. So I think that if you have a guy like that, you can really mix it up. You can even move him in the slot if you need to. But he's the ideal change up to what they have in Brian Robinson.
It wasn't for lack of trying the screen game last year. They were all over the screen, but they just couldn't execute it. Hopefully, with EB in town now, they'll bring some of that screen game. And to your point, get the multiple running back sets back in place. There's no reason Gibson can't be that McKissick type difference maker that I think most of the fan base thought he always would be, and for whatever reason, they just never decided to put him in those positions. Ian, who are you looking at here?
So I went with Cameron Mitchell, cornerback out of Northwestern. I was really excited to get him at this point. I think he's just a really impressive playmaker, and I'm surprised that he's been kind of slept on throughout this process. Some really solid tape. Went out to his pro day and the scouting combine, put up some really impressive numbers. A bit wiry. Especially for adding like a second corner, though, I think that room could just use depth. I know Cam Dantzler just signed as well, but you want competition at the bottom of the depth chart. And I think he's certainly one who can give it. He has experience, played for multiple years, doesn't really have like the high upside ball skills. But again, when you're looking at this part in the draft, you're looking for traits. You're looking for a guy who can step in right away. And I would actually think that he could play at least a rotational role pretty early in his career. He's someone that, especially in this range, I'm probably looking at him like a round or two higher on my board, just because I think he can be a contributor pretty early on.
Let's do this as we kind of get on in time here. I asked you both to bring two mocks because I find that the way it sets up can really determine how these things go. So let's start over with your second mocks, and we'll just try to get through like maybe the first three rounds here. So Ian, let's start with you. Before you start there, I'm curious, some people have these different I don't know if rules is the right thing, but like I'm not drafting a running back in round one, or I'm not, taking a tight end in the first 15 picks. Like, do you subscribe to any of those, or are you strictly got to get the best players we can at the position we're drafting?
I don't really have any firm rules. If you're taking a running back, it needs to kind of be like the missing piece, or it just needs to be, super rare, elite, truly like a generational back. Tight end's pretty uncommon for me, but I mean, there's been a couple first round tight ends I've had throughout the years. So in general, I'm looking at premium positions, though. I'm always going to give the edge just towards those premium positions. So I do try to follow really what the NFL has shown with like the spending, like spending kind of guides what they think will be premium. So nothing hard there, but I do have some general, guidelines that I go by.
And one other one, do you feel like we are switching the value of pass rushers from the edge to the interior a little bit more each year?
I think so, and that's a good question. Edge rushers will always be what they are, but the spending at DT has kind of shown us, right, that when you can get that
Mhm.
rare athlete, that's why I was actually shocked last year that uh, who was the guy that Jordan Davis. Jordan Davis, I think, should have been a top 3, top 5 pick. Like, I am shocked
Correct.
he went anywhere below that pick. Like, that's unbelievable to me because you do not find humans that big that can move like that and that are that skilled. And then when he was on the field, he showed why. He was an absolute monster for the Eagles. And so, yeah, I think when you're looking, I think like even like the Jalen Carter. So it's a good example of like, do you go Jalen Carter? Like, let's say he had, perfect character concerns, whatever, or Will Anderson. It's really hard to not go with Carter. I think the reason why you go with Anderson is because the edge position usually produces quicker than impactful defensive tackles. They usually take a year or two longer to kind of develop. But I think that when you look at building your defense from the inside out, I just think it really makes sense because there's been, I mean, just look at it historically. True game wrecking defensive tackles have always been a unicorn, and it always changes how a
Mm.
defense operates going back to Vince Wilfork, going back to way, way, way before that. Those guys are just impossible to find.
Yeah, it was odd with Jordan Davis. People kept saying he was only going to be a two down defensive tackle. And I was thinking to myself, like, what have you been watching? Because when allowed to rush the passer, which they really didn't allow him to do much in Georgia just because of the scheme, he was incredible. So I always that mystified me as to why people thought that was going to be the thing. All right, let's start with these first couple of picks in the next mock. Adam, let's start with you.
Yeah, the second one I did a trade back because, again, just like last year, I called it last year. I definitely think they're in play for that. So they just went back a couple picks with Seattle from number 20, got an extra second round. I took Anton Harrison, tackle from Oklahoma. This is a situation where he also played left tackle and right tackle. I could see him coming in playing right tackle and potentially being that future blindside guy. But at 16, it was a little too rich. The cornerbacks were off the board, but I did see there was a couple tackles on the board with the simulator. So thought move back a couple, see what they can get, and it worked because by getting him, it allowed them to get that cornerback that they need in the second round. But I think Harrison, depending on who you talk to, people think that he's extremely limited, but then there's people that compare him to Trent Williams, another Oklahoma Sooner. So I have him somewhere in the middle of that. He's not quite either one of those, but I really loved his upside, and I think again day one right tackle, but with the ceiling to move to left tackle in the future. So I thought that was a great opportunity, and maybe they would allow them to move on from Leno after this year, but I think he sticks this year and looking for the future next year because he's just he's not good enough to be long term for this offensive line.
Adam, I should pre-forewarn you. Your Twitter is going to blow up with angry people suggesting you should never compare anybody to Trent Williams.
Oh yeah.
So I think you're probably in trouble today, pal.
Yeah, again, just what I've heard people say, and I mentioned that in my evaluation that that people have propped him up to that. I definitely wouldn't compare. I'm very careful in who I do any comps to, but definitely not Trent Williams. Just the school.
Ian, what do you got here on this one?
I like that pick too. And I actually went with Brian Branch. I stayed at 16. I went with Brian Branch. And looking a little bit forward with this defense to say, do we want to kind of take things a little bit different direction? Do we want to modernize a little bit? Do we want, instead of going cornerback, because cornerbacks were mostly off the board for my draft, I think there's a really good opportunity to get a slot safety who can just do what Bobby McCain was doing. I mean, and that's at a higher level. And I love Bobby McCain. Like, I grew up watching the guy with Miami. Like, I saw him develop into what he's become, and he's a really good player. But I think that Brian Branch can be that guy like right away. And so like the ability to plug him into this defense you talk about, they already have a little bit of a different structure. because of the linebacker situation. You can add basically another coach on the field to that secondary position at that safety position with Branch, and you can really kind of look at more. Okay, let's take this defense to like there's modern, but we can really take it to like let's go modern. And I think you have a lot of versatility with that back end. Yes, I'd like to get more cornerback talent, but I think Branch is a really, really strong prospect, especially in a draft that's not particularly strong at certain positions. I don't think there's a ton of stars in this class. I think he's just going to be a really good player for a long time.
I love this pick. And it's totally where this organization has been trending for 2 years. You know, with the pick of Percy Butler last year, they want safeties out there, multiple safeties flying all over the field. The defense, it was noticeable. Two things were noticeable last year. One was noticeable when Cam Curl wasn't on the field. I mean, just the metrics tank. The other was when they were able to get Derek Forrest out there in that free safety spot and move Bobby McCain into that big nickel strong safety slot, where frankly he was always better suited to play in my mind than back in the natural free safety spot. That's when things really got going. So getting to a point where you've got four safeties on the field at one time with Jamin Davis and that D line, and once you can get two premier boundary guys, probably won't happen this year, obviously, but no, I love the pick, and I think it's where this organization is heading. So love that one. All right, let's get on to the next one. Adam, what do you got here? You traded back, so you have 2 picks in the second round now?
Two picks in the second round. So with the pick that they got from Seattle, I have them taking Mississippi State corner Emmanuel Forbes. A little skinny for me. I like the corners to have a little more meat on them, but decent size. He's shown he'd be a boundary guy. I have heard some evaluators talk about that he does have some upside to play the slot. I'm not sure about that, but I just thought he was great value. You've seen a lot of mocks and, evaluators actually have him in the first round, which I don't see that. But I think in the second round, it was great value to get him, especially at a position of need.
All right, Ian, who do you have here in the second round?
So I went with tight end. So I kind of took this draft in the opposite direction, kind of went with positions I didn't take in our other draft. And so I'm going with Dalton Kincaid. I'm not sure he's going to be there at that point, but I had a couple choices here. I think Luke Musgrave was also on the board. I talked about it. As much as I like, some of these talents that they have at tight end, what if they just want to say, offense, we're giving you everything you need to succeed? And I think Kincaid can be that guy, really, really good athlete, has just tremendous, I think, body control, ability to make these crazy catches. Like it seemed like every game he just had like a amazing catch that you just don't see from tight ends. Really good ability to get downfield. Think he can do a good job with creating space, right? So not necessarily in separation. I mean, he can, but more so with his body control, more so with his catch radius. I think he has a really great catch radius. Does a good job of kind of waiting to extend his arms until the last second. Really plays the game more like a receiver, but he is a true tight end. So I think he'd be a really solid long-term answer for them.
I'm assuming Washington's off the board there. How do you kind of have your tight ends ranked out of this class?
Yeah, it's tough to do because they are different. I think Kincaid would be my tight end 1. I would have Washington 2, and it's just because he's such a physical freak. Michael Mayer 3. I think he's good, but like as I've probably been alluding to this whole time, I want upside. I don't know that Mayer's good, but like, is he going to be more like a Hayden Hurst? I don't really have that much interest in drafting a Hayden Hurst over a guy who can be Mark Andrews, right? Just totally different ball game there. And then Musgrave there. But these are good players. Like it is, I don't know if I've ever seen a tight end class this strong without like a true number one star in there. I think there's some really good players, but this is the next generation. I think this class really defines the next generation of the tight end position.
All right, Adam, you had a second pick in the second round there. What you got?
A guy we talked about, John Michael Schmitz from Minnesota, the center. Enough said. He comes in. Does he need to play right away? Probably not with what they have. But this is your center of the future. So again, if he's on the board, I think you don't hesitate and you run to the table with that ticket.
And we'll wrap with this third round here. Adam, who do you have?
We talked about tight ends just now. There's another tight end, and it might be a little early for some people, but I really like what I saw from, which is South Dakota State tight end Tucker Kraft. Extremely athletic, played a lot of receiver. Big body guy, about 6'5". Really spreads the field, and I think you've seen in Washington They just haven't had that guy that's really been able to open it up. And I think with Eric Bieniemy, he's really going to want to, open up the field with the tight ends, to open up the downfield game for the wide receivers. I took him because he was great value. I'm not sure if they're going to take one, before the 5th round, because from everyone I talked to with the organization, they really love what they have, and that's why Logan Thomas is going to stay. So they're kind of deep right now. But a guy like this, smaller school guy, I'm always intrigued on these guys of their upside. And I think that Tucker Kraft could really just be, an awesome weapon for Sam Howell in year 1.
And Ian, we'll wrap with you.
Great. Another tight end. Yeah, I should have mentioned him too. I love that pick too. So we're on the same wavelength here. So I actually went with Luke Whippler out of Ohio State, center. Again, I want someone long-term who I'm going to start banking on. Whippler probably can play this year, but he's not maybe going to push as much as I think John Michael Schmitz. I mean, you could probably move off of really, whatever you need to as soon as you draft him. I think Whippler's good. I don't think that he's that next level of center like John Michael Schmitz. Not yet, but a really good athlete, impressive at Ohio State. Again, looking at athleticism, not necessarily the best power blocker, but he has really good movement ability. He can hold his blocks well. He's good at double teaming. I think he's really, really smart. Like following the Buckeye program, pretty closely the last couple of years because they've had so many just prospects overall. Like they've been extremely impressed with him and his ability to step in very quickly and learn and take to coaching. And so I think he's someone that you would be very happy with year 1 or year 2, maybe year 2 that you start him. But like you talked about, like the depth issues, and we've seen like Larson too, like he's had some of those issues too. So, with staying on the field. So for me, it's more of a value thing. I think he'll probably go quite a bit higher than this. And so seeing his name, it was like, oh yeah, we've got to add him.
Fellas, this was great. I had a blast doing this. Ian, what should we be looking out for you and the PFN guys?
Yeah, so we're switching over to draft content at this point. So a lot of stuff, looking at all these pro days, looking at all of the best fits, kind of looking at Jalen Carter and kind of comparing him to maybe like Laramie Tunsil and kind of what he went through in the pre-draft process, and Lael Collins and what he went through, and just trying to get a handle on that situation because it is so complex, and it's not often that the best overall player in the draft is facing, a really tough situation. So we're going to try.
Do you think he'll take a drop? Do you think he'll take a drop? I still see most mocks having him going to Seattle at like 5.
Yeah, I think Arizona and Seattle, those 2 teams are the question. The question becomes, does Arizona trade out? And if they don't, if Seattle, do they want a quarterback? Because I think Stroud goes 1. If Stroud goes 1, and I think that really has a cascading effect on everything else. What happens with Lamar Jackson? Do like the Colts? Because if someone trades up to 3, the Colts may just decide, okay, we're just going to take the best available player. Maybe they take Will Anderson then, and then it's like, well, when you start getting to Seattle, they might just have to take Carter because there's just not another elite player. And I think Seattle would be his floor though. Unless if they have their hearts on Bryce Young or Anthony Richardson's on the board, or they, unless if there's a quarterback that falls to them, I don't think Carroll. I think he's always going to take a risk on personality. I use that very lightly because I don't know, but like. And I think Jalen Carter's a young guy who is just shown young guy decisions, right? Like, I don't think he's a terrible person just based off what we've read, the facts, right? I think Pete Carroll will look at that and I think he'll say, I can work with this young man. I think he is just so immensely talented. It's such a rare opportunity. And he hasn't had that type of guy since like Michael Bennett and those guys. So it's been quite a while since he's had like a true game wrecker in that defensive front. And I think he's just going to not be able to control himself. And I don't blame him one bit because once you start getting past 5, like I've seen him, maybe even fall to like 8, 9 in that range. I'm just like, I just can't imagine. It happened with Laramie Tunsil, but like there's been so much more time that teams can actually investigate into this and get a good feel for who he is. And it's just a little bit unique too, because you do have that team that historically doesn't care about quote unquote character concerns.
Ian, we appreciate your time today. Had a blast. And Adam, I'll see you next week.
Take it easy, guys.